So today we have part 3 of Really Real Queens. We're still going in chronological order as we did before, and today we have 4 more queens who were twin different. These women were awesome. They did a lot of great things for other people, but none of them wore crowns, had people beheaded, or married their relatives. Well, okay, there was one. One of them married a relative. Just stay tuned so you can hear about that, okay? First off, we have Marie Curie. She didn't marry her relative. She was the first woman ever to win a Nobel Prize. She won her first Nobel Prize in 1903 for radioactivity. She discovered polonium and radium. She named polonium after Poland, which is where she was from. So she really did awesome things. But back then, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, women weren't supposed to be doing research in laboratories, and they just weren't allowed in the laboratories doing research. So she conducted most of her experiments in a damp and leaky shed. She got married though. She married another scientist, another researcher, and they had 2 daughters. When her 2 daughters were young, her husband was in an accident and was unalived. So she was left with 2 children to raise on her own. She was later offered her husband's job. Apparently there was no one else who knew the research that they were both doing together or separately in different places. I think after she won the first Nobel Prize, she was allowed to go and do research in the lab. After her husband's passing, she was offered his job, which she took. So that was a good thing for her, and she was able to carry on more research. So then in 1911, she won another Nobel Prize, which was really awesome because she continued the research. You know, she didn't stop and, wait for good things to happen. She just continued on her way with her research, and she loved doing it. Then during World War I, she assisted the medical teams in World War I, helping the soldiers, and she traveled around with X-ray equipment. This was new, X-ray equipment. They didn't have it before, and she taught the medical people how to use the X-ray equipment. She's a great example of someone who carried on. Next, we have Gertrude Ederle. In 1926, she was the first woman to ever swim the English Channel. She was a swimmer, of course, before that. She was an Olympian and had won a gold medal in the Olympics before that. But only 5 people had swam the English Channel before she did it, and they were all men. She was 19 years old at the time, and it took her over 14 hours to swim the 21-mile channel. But she did it almost 2 hours faster than any of the men, the 5 men who had swam the channel before. This was a huge feat, and when she got back to the United States, she was given a big, huge ticker tape parade with thousands of people. The boats, when they came into the dock, the boats were honking their horns and people were waiting. People were so excited about that. But she said later, the challenge wasn't just to swim the English Channel. It was also to prove that it could be done by a woman. She had had some hearing loss as a child, but the cold water of the English Channel further damaged her hearing, and she eventually was completely deaf. So she went on to teach children sign language. So she was a really neat lady, and just goes to show, don't give up. She was very passionate about swimming and breaking records, so she didn't give up. She just continued. We're saying today it's just a drop in the bucket compared to all the information on these queens that's available. There have been books written about all of them. They're on the internet. There's just a ton of information available. So we don't have enough time to say all that today, but you could do your own research. If you're interested in what they did and how they did it, it'd be a great fun thing for you to do your research and see what you could emulate and how you could use their practices to be very successful. Marie McLeod Bethune. She felt that she was called to be a missionary and teach black children. So she started a school in Daytona, Florida, and she was the ultimate fundraiser. She needed a lot of help to get this project off the ground, so she went around talking to people, and she just had a gift for talking to people and getting their support, which is a great skill to have. So she got the school started, and it grew and grew and grew. Eventually, it was merged with Cookman Institute, and now today it is Bethune-Cookman University. Still going strong, still doing great, and a great place for learning for a lot of people. She was also a good friend of Eleanor Roosevelt, who we'll talk about in a minute. And no, Mary was not married to a relative. Eleanor Roosevelt was 34 years old in 1918 when she discovered that her husband, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had been unfaithful with her secretary. Up until that point, her life had just completely revolved around her husband. That's the way it was back then. Women didn't have lives of their own, and actually in 1918 they weren't even allowed to vote yet. But after that, she just really started to live her own life and not worry about what he thought and do things that were in her heart to do. She did a lot of things that had never been done before. She was the First Lady of the United States from 1933 to 1945, because her husband was the president by then. And as the First Lady, she was the First Lady to hold press conferences. They never did that before. She was the first one to go and make speeches when asked to give speeches for groups. She went and gave speeches. She also wrote for newspaper columns and magazine columns, and she appeared on the radio. She also publicly supported racial equality, even though threats were made against her life because of it. When Marian Anderson couldn't get permission from the DAR to hold a concert at Constitution Hall, she resigned. Eleanor Roosevelt resigned from the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, when they refused to let Marian Anderson hold a concert there. The concert was later held at the Lincoln Memorial before an audience of 75,000 people. She was also friends with Marie McLeod Bethune. You know, we just spoke about her. And they did projects together over the years and were good friends. Eleanor Roosevelt was almost 6 feet tall, and she had six children with her husband, FDR, who was also her 5th cousin once removed. So there you go. There's the person who married their relatives. He was a distant relative, for sure, but still a relative way down the line. She was a remarkable queen. And today, she's still considered one of the most admired women of the 20th century. So today, we've heard from 4 really great queens who ruled their universes and give us something today to aspire to. They were Marie Curie, Gertrude Ederle, Marie McLeod Bethune, and Eleanor Roosevelt. Yes, Eleanor Roosevelt was the one who married a relative. He was her 5th cousin once removed. So he was a very distant relative, but nevertheless a relative. Not like some of the queens that we talked about before who actually married their brothers or their cousins, their first cousins. So anyway, this is a lot of fun going over this with you all. And I hope you enjoyed it. Come back for more. And the most important thing though is don't forget to love yourself.